my own computer. So I've had to find ways back in. So what I'll do is I'll actually start this session fairly quickly. Welcome all. And, again, my humble apologies for not being able to get this going on time. I certainly will be calling TASAC and working out why I'm getting locked out of my own system. But essentially that is my problem, and I will get to work on that. So let's have a look at this. What have we got? We've got week 2, and our focus this week, believe it or not, I'm still having problems. Okay, our focus this week is going to be on clearly pedagogical frameworks in science. And we're going to look at the anatomy of science units. And again, my apologies, believe it or not, IT is one of my specialisations. You wouldn't think so, would you? But anyway, we'll keep going. So again, I'll just build on what we do in this Zoom session. I basically cover 3 areas of territory. I have a look at the forums and see what's going on there. I also look at the weekly tasks and talk a little bit about those. And obviously something that I find students value a lot is I try to make as many links to assessment as I possibly can. So they're the three areas where I try to cover some ground in this particular unit. So looking at this week, again, we're building on our contributory model of e-learning. And I just want to say that this is the quietest forum that I've ever had in an online course I've taught. And I'm wondering, it can't be because everything is crystal clear and everybody's organised. So I'm just suggesting, you may want to get online and ask a few more questions. Make me work. That's what I'm here for. And when I can get my IT right, everything usually goes pretty well. So the contributory student model, the more you contribute, the more you'll get out of it. And the harder you make me work, the more explicit I can make things for you. So let's make sure we're working on building your contribution so that we can actually solve a lot of problems before they come up. So looking at our next slide, from the Q&As. Now, we've had some fairly good questions come up this week. Kate McNamara raised a lot of really good questions about hotspots and hot times in the primary connections unit. Now, as you know, everyone focuses pretty much on the Pedagogy and how to do the first assessment, but bear in mind that the first 5 weeks of work actually feed into the assessment. So we're getting you to contemplate at each stage. And Kate's actually picked her unit and looking at how to tackle it. And I think her topic was engagement from memory. And so when you're looking at engagement, how are you going to tackle this particular problem and this particular issue in your approach? And the key is to look at hot spots and hot times. So when you're looking at your Pedagogy, just because your research topic, and bear in mind you've got 10 research topics, your goal is to pick one of those, to pick a primary connections unit, and then to explore that topic within the safety of that unit. And I do say safety because it gives you a focus, it narrows down your inquiry, and it helps you focus on what you need to focus on. So in every unit, for every topic, whether it's engagement or ICTs or Indigenous perspectives or sustainability, whatever your topic, there are hotspots and hot times in your unit. And I would encourage you to identify what they are. For instance, the 5 E's. Okay, engagement occurs up front of every primary connections unit, the same with Science by Doing, the secondary versions. Engagement is the first of the 5 E's. But engagement doesn't stop there. Engagement actually lapses into motivation, and motivation is a combination of diagnostic assessment, that is stripping down students' misunderstandings and then reconstructing them through formative assessment. And that happens usually at stages 2 and 3. The formative assessment stage is the 2nd and 3rd of the 5 E's. And then, of course, we get into summative assessment, which is the last 2 E's. And there, of course, you're expected to look at how engagement, for instance, might involve an exciting task, one that stretches the students and gets them to demand and perform in an authentic way. So when you're looking at your topic, no matter what it is, sustainability, ICTs, etc., look for hot spots and hot times in your unit. That's what you focus on. Verity raised a really good question about using Prezi as a software option. Now, PowerPoint, of course, is the prescribed one, and the reason being is because it's a staple of the Pedagogy convention. And Pedagogy is a convention. It's 20 slides in 20 minutes. Now, the only problem with Prezi is it's dynamic, and it also requires your markers to have license and access to the Prezi cloud in order to mark your work. Now, because CQU requires you to submit a piece of assessment, really we can't have markers going looking for it in the cloud. So we're going to have to put a line through Prezi purely until we get advice on that from the academic board, and just see whether it is a viable way to post assessment. Because certainly at the moment you're not uploading anything, all you're doing is uploading an external link to a cloud. So it can create risks for you, and it can create risks for the marker, and it can put a process at risk. So we'll put a line through Prezi, although I'm a big fan of Prezi too. Anyone else in the audience use Prezi? Monique, are you a Prezi user? Maxine, Chris, anyone a Prezi user?
No, I'm not.
Okay. I mean, you do require a license to get access to full Prezi capabilities. So it is a little bit limiting if you're trying to use it with students. But it is, you know, some people would argue a lot more dynamic. You can actually just hang videos and everything in there. So it's really quite a dynamic little interface. But if you don't get a chance to look at it this term, bear in mind when we do our digital cards, you may want to include it there as part of your assessment, and linking from a Prezi presentation into a digital card somewhere in a repository. David Graham wanted the full Monty. In other words, he was looking for the PDF units. And believe it or not, I've had a second question, David, so you're not alone. People are finally starting to ask the right questions. So thank you for asking this. When I set up the Pedagogy, I suggested you go to the library, to the Primary Connections library that I've put on site in our subject. Now, I can't actually bring that up for you because my access to my own computer has been severely compromised by Zoom. Unfortunately, it's actually locked me away from my own files. I'm not quite sure how I've got access to you right now, but I have. But so David, there is a link on the way down when you're looking at the Primary Connections library. It's the third link on the subject content page. It does say the library, the PC library. And if you jump in there, you'll see all of the folders have been organised on year-by-year levels. And when you open that folder, it will actually download to your desktop or to your C drive, and it will provide you with 4 to 6 units in your age group from which you can browse and choose that relate to biological, earth and space sciences. So don't be confused. Your unit, your PDF unit should be around about 100 pages long. So there should be plenty of information for you to work with. And Carly raised an interesting question in the Q&As about animations. Can we do an animation? And there is no reason why you can't. You do your animations within your PowerPoint slides, bearing in mind that you've got 20 seconds. And I want to caution here, PowerPoint is a clunky technology. So if I were you at this stage, and I do forewarn of this on the subject Moodle page, allow 17 seconds per slide, not 20. Purely because PowerPoint transitions, and it transitions in a very clunky and mechanical way. So you actually lose 2 to 3 seconds. So if you can, get your talking, your oral component, get it in 17 seconds and allow your slides 2 to 3 seconds of wait time or transition time. Does anybody want to ask anything about that at this stage, about the PowerPoint process of putting together a PC, a Pedagogy, and using PowerPoint? It's a clunky process, but it's reliable. It's generally reliable.
Colin, it's Sarah here. Hi.
Hello, Sarah.
Just wanted to go back and just ask, where did you say that library link was again? Was it in this week's tutorial, in this week's ebook?
It actually starts before the ebooks. If you have a look at the subject webpage, and I've actually written a response to David in the forum, directing him to it. But when you get onto the Moodle homepage, the first link is to the Pedagogy, the second link is to the digital cards, and the third menu bar will take you to the library. And then week 1, week 2, week 3, right through to week 12.
Thank you.
On that very initial content page, and that's a really good question. So it's really important to make sure we're all starting at the same point, and you'll find a range of units there, and I've tried to cover a diversity of interests. So every topic should be well represented in the units that are available there. And for those of you using the forums, we've got the general Q&A forum, and then in the Pedagogy, I've actually embedded a forum explicitly for the Pedagogy, so please direct all questions there. And that relate to the Pedagogy, and that'll be fine. Other general questions can go into the Q&A forum for everybody to consider. And bear in mind, the aim here, the purpose of a good functional Q&A is to stop us getting caught in any traps that we can avoid. Yeah, it's really important that we be explicit there. All right, the weekly tasks. Now, this week in the ebook, there's quite a few tasks, and there's an audio podcast by Charles Fidel. It's a really good task, but really the take-home ones that you need to do this week really relate to these 4 points. Define curriculum, and Gregson does it for on page 58. And essentially, it's what students need to learn and how they need to learn it. And it's a statement, and we all know that it's essentially a political statement. Again, because governments of the day put it in place. We know that we have this ugly system since Federation where the state systems are responsible for compulsory education up to year 10, and the federal government are responsible for all education, including the federal government are responsible up to year 10, and the state governments are responsible for all education up to year 12, even though state curricula is set largely at the school level and largely at the state board level for senior students. The curriculum has a range of models. I mean, we've got the Montessori model, the International Baccalaureate. For instance, one of the things I've done in the past is actually started up a baccalaureate school in Cairns, at Cairns High School, trained staff in baccalaureate principles. And if you read any of the research, for instance, the International Baccalaureate curriculum, particularly the senior school and also the junior school, is and middle school is rated the #1 curriculum in the world, and it is quite different to our Queensland curriculum in its demands. But curriculum is a statement, and there's what we call the hidden curriculum, which is the values of a particular school. I mean, you'll never see them written down. You usually see them enacted through staff and through the agents of the school. And then we've got our formal curriculum, and we've got our curriculum processes. So curriculum can be a range of things. It can be a statement. It can be a process. It can be, a formalisation, for instance, like the Year 11 and 12 Queensland state curriculum. It can be the baccalaureate curriculum. It can be the VET curriculum. It can be many things. The second thing you need to do this week is define pedagogy, and essentially it's the art and science of teaching. And I throw in the question there, andragogy. Anyone like to nominate what andragogy means? Anyone come across the term before? And yet you all practice it. It's actually the art and science of teaching adults. Pedagogy is the art and science of teaching children. So there's a really interesting split there when we talk about pedagogy. Pedagogy actually relates to young learners. Andragogy relates to older learners. And believe it or not, there's a lot of literature about andragogy as well. Charles Fidel is a thought leader in the 21st century. And the reason why I threw in here, particularly in the engaged section of this week, is to get you thinking about the Australian curriculum in science, about how ambitious it is, what it's trying to achieve, and ultimately where education is trying to go with all of its current challenges. And the final thing we ask you to do this week, and it's really important if you can get to this stage. I know some of you have started the unit late, but spend a bit of time in there. Have a look at your primary connections unit and complete the evaluation activity on the 5th E of the ebook for this week. If you're doing that, but really by week 2, you will have selected your topic, you will have selected your unit for the first assessment item, and over the next 3 weeks, you'll actually be developing your understanding and enriching your perspectives. So this week, they're the 4 things, the 4 take-home things you really need to do. So let's have a bit of a look at Charles Fidel and see what he's on about. Oh, sorry, the learning tasks just this week off the webpage. Describe, explain, identify. It's always good to know what you're meant to do. Our key terms, curriculum, pedagogy, narrative. A narrative essentially is a verbal or textual account. It can also be a dream. It can also be a therapy. An hypothesis, again, we're leaning towards the science models here and descriptions. And models is just a set of theories that are widely accepted. Now, a model, believe it or not, is a set of theory. It doesn't have to be proven. Okay, but a model is a set of theory, and it's what we call, in other words, a heuristic, and you'll see that term bandied around a lot. Now, the models that we look at primarily for this subject, and the ones that you'll be looking at for your Paishakusha, will largely be representations, student representations, and in turn, you will be finding visual images and visual messages to represent your understanding in the Paishakusha. So that's the sort of model that we're referring to here as we talk about science. And science is all about building models. I mean, it's very hard to replicate a nuclear bomb without drawing attention to yourself. I mean, look at North Korea. So, we're talking about models, about hypotheticals, about learning, testing, and experiencing theories. Charles Fidel, did anyone actually listen to the podcast?
Yes, I did. It was very good.
Would you like to explain, what did you find good about it?
He explained, sorry, I took a lot of notes. Hold on. He explained and went through all of the 4C stuff in relation to the, communication, critical thinking, creativity, collaboration. And then he went on to explain them further in relation to capabilities, mindfulness, reflection, curiosity, the wellness. He also talked about the personalisation of education and how we as teachers deliver that program in relation to that personalisation with your students. He talked about artificial intelligence. He talked about algorithms and the automaticity that's needed within the science curriculum. Is that enough?
Look, Nicole, that's an amazing summary. Thank you so much. That's brilliant. I urge you all to have a good listen to Charles Fidel. It takes you 15 to 18 minutes. But really, he talks about that next generation of learning. And what Nicole indicated is that we're moving towards a model, what we know about the brain now and about brain science. Age-based learning is redundant. Age-based learning is actually creating disengagement. Because let's face it, we have kids at home with very supportive environments who are way ahead. We have kids coming from home environments who are way behind. When they come into a common denominator, the lowest common denominator that we call their age learning level, it's only going to hit about 45% of the target population. The remaining 55 are going to branch off and do something of their own. So Fidel touches on this beautifully. And moving forward, what we know about brain science, we're looking at kids rolling into schools, having an interview with a staff member. That staff member then applying the principles of neuroscience and neuroplasticity and talking to a student about an individual program that's going to last them for 2 years. That will be a project built on their own interests that will actually involve literacy, numeracy, technology, integrated theories and processes, social science, art, creativity. All of those different things will be bandied together. And Fidel talks about this beautifully in that little podcast. But he talks about volatility, an uncertain world. And he talks about the need for us to become more skilled. And Nicole raised the point of mindfulness, that to become more mindful in our practice and approach to life, to adapt to new situations. He identifies 6 factors. 3 of them are human and 3 of them are technological. And some of the big things he points to changing our learning is that we've got increased human longevity. That is, we're living longer. Now, even the psychological fields acknowledge this. They talk about 2 adulthoods. One adulthood where you basically get up to your late 40s, 50s, and then your second adulthood commences after 50s when you have a midlife crisis. What it is really your body and your brain acknowledging that you've lived one life. Once upon a time, that's all we lived. The average age was 50, 55, 60. Now, once we reach that stage, we're retiring and we're beginning a whole new adulthood. The second thing is global connectivity, environmental stresses, and without technology, we would not have the capacity to feed 1 billion people, let alone the 7 billion people we have. And technology factors will also condition our future. Smart machines and systems, the explosive growth of data, and what we call amplified humans. So let's look a little bit at some of those things. And I just find Fidel's work fascinating. We're living longer. We're more connected. And for instance, you just have to look at Russia and the US election at the moment, global connectivity. Who actually elected Donald Trump to power? It's a really interesting question. Environmental stresses. The rise of smart machines. And here we're talking about economic instability. We're talking about political change. Now, we've heard a lot about that here in Australia, and with the election of Donald Trump, we talk about the disenfranchised electing a government, that is the politics of desire and the politics of complaint. We're seeing all sorts of changes, increases in unemployment, an overdependence on technology, and of course, as a result, people are becoming less resourceful. Okay, we're becoming more like battery chickens and hens. Big data, we know about privacy concerns. And this notion of amplified humans, this is a really interesting notion. Advances in prosthetics, genetics, pharmacology, drugs, they're all redefining human capabilities. And we only have to look at sport as an area where this is happening. But we also need to look at embryo experimentation too, and cryogenics and a whole range of those kinds of things that we thought perhaps were a part of the Nazi era, but are actually refurbishing now under the subtitle of Amplified Humans. So we're facing a very complex world, and therefore the argument is we need a new system of education. Now, Fidel says that we've got 4 principles or 4 dimensions for the new curriculum, and he says basically it's built around character, skills, knowledge, and metacognition. That is that concept that we have a higher awareness of our place in the world, and you know, of who we are and what we do and how we do it. Our character, our skills, and our knowledge. So it is really worth a listen. I do commend it to you because it gives you an idea of where you're going as a teacher and some of the failings of the system you're about to sign up to, and what they are and what they need to address. So how do we do this? I mean, let's go back to Gregson, page 78 to 71. He talks about signature pedagogies. Anyone like to suggest an idea what he means by signature pedagogies? What do we mean by that term?
Just taking a stab, maybe your individual teaching style.
Fabulous, yeah. Your individual teaching style, or your, to take it another level, the teaching styles pegged to our current educational system. So when we look at the Australian curriculum of science, it does actually demand teachers follow an inquiry model. And it also talks about productive pedagogies. Now, productive pedagogies were a brainchild, really, of the early 2000s, the early noughties, and Peter Freebody down at University of Queensland was led the charge in this. It's now migrated to Singapore, and you know, for those of you who follow international education, know that Singapore is the leading nation in the world in terms of educational outcomes. Singapore, Canada, and Finland often split that prize. So it's quite a surprise to know that, and that the whole origin of that system originated here in Queensland and actually, unfortunately, was migrated overseas. But productive pedagogies, what are they? Well, there's 20 of them. And Gregson does list them in the text. You can see them there. I've put them at the bottom of the page. But it's all the things we talk about in primary connections: connectedness, recognition of difference, cultural knowledge, inclusivity, narrative, group identity, supportive classroom environment. We talk about collaborative learning, academic engagement, and of course, intellectual quality. And it's all about you as a teacher stepping up and using this pedagogical framework to implement a curriculum that is quite engaging. So we've got a continua, basically, which talks about low order thinking and higher order thinking. And higher order, I mean, you know, how long is a piece of string? You know, what do we mean when we say, oh, that was good? Now, that pizza was good. Compared to what? Well, higher order thinking, same thing. But it's you know, the Wittgenstein explanation of it is, you know, the family explanation. When students combine facts and ideas that synthesize, generalize, explain, hypothesize, here you can see Bloom here, can't you? The upper levels of Bloom, arrive at some conclusion or interpretation. They're manipulating information and ideas through processes, allow students to solve problems, gain understanding, discover new meanings. That's what we call higher order thinking. And at the lower end, we've got lower order thinking. And Gregson talks about that this week, you know, about the whole notion of our signature pedagogies ought to be able to deliver up here at the higher end. This is our focus. This is where we want to be. It's a continuum, because when we look at it, we can say, for instance, there's all 20 productive pedagogies. You can be at the lower end or you can be at the higher end. And of course, in classrooms now, for instance, we do the profiling, and the profiling is all centered around the notion of where your students are, how you're engaging them in higher order thinking, or, you know, are they at the lower end? Do they have deep understanding and substantive conversations? Or, you know, are you missing that mark? Almost all students demonstrate understanding of simple information that they're able to remember. Now, this characterises the low end, characterises the old Australian curriculum. And this is something that Professor Dennis Goodrum, the architect of the ACS, the new ACS, was particularly critical of. Okay, he said, we've got to get away from this notion of just teaching science as knowledge. We've got to get up here where students can actually use science, as Piaget said in 1962, to become scientists in their own life. They've got to have substantive conversations with their world. And it's got to be transformative, okay? We can look at a low-end pedagogy. Virtually no features of substantive conversation occur during the lesson. And here, I hate to say, you know, explicit teaching or direct teaching fits in down here. A lot of, you know, it's got a lot of fans, particularly Indigenous classrooms. However, we must ask ourselves, you know, does that direct teaching, does explicit teaching, explicit instruction actually allow our students access to high-end dialogue, to high-end substantive conversation? Okay, if they're too busy following the I do, you know, we do, you do model. If they're following that, then really, you know, are they going beyond this dialogic model here in the middle? Do they ever get into those deeper understandings? And this is a question that I'll throw to you, because ultimately, you know, has anyone taught in a school using the direct instruction method, or explicit instruction it's sometimes called, direct teaching?
Yeah.
Noelle, would you like to explain, how did you find that? How did you find students related to that?
It was a math lesson, so I found that it was quite effective, and it was a new concept. But I could see, because it was just it was my prac, I did 5 in a row of the lessons, and by the end of it, they were quite bored.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? And yet, under that particular approach, we are required in some schools, particularly in the Cape York connection, we're required to stick to that pedagogy and not veer from it at any point in time. Are we limiting our students' opportunities again, or are we enhancing, you know, what was essentially a learning gap? Again, you know, the proof is in the pudding. But as a teacher, we must move between these pedagogies. We must know when to implement a low end, at which stage to engage and indulge the students and subscribe and test their knowledge, and then sweep them along and reconstruct that at the higher end into some deeper understandings. So when we look at that, this week, Gregson also raised on page 81 TPASC. Now, this is also known as TPAC, but it's a teacher's pedagogical and content knowledge. And it's how teachers really work with technology, how teachers work across a range of different platforms. And you'll see, for instance, some schools have rich technology platforms, which allows you to really do a lot of ICT integration. There's a lot of online stuff. There's global networking. They're breaking down barriers between time and the classroom. They're flipping their classroom and engaging in a whole lot of techniques that allow more face-to-face and hands-on time in the classroom. Low-level pedagogy, okay, you can sort of see this happening in a lot of schools. And a lot of schools will argue that we have a digital pedagogy operating in the school, but really it's about internet search, and kids can do that anywhere. It's really about computers, you know, to type up and present assessment tasks in a particular format. It's really about compliance and governance. And so, you know, it's an administrative focus in a lot of schools' technology. And so when we talk about TPASC and TPAC, it comes up again in week 6. We'll raise it again in some depth. But Gregson raises it this week, so do have a look at it. Because our Signa pedagogies integrate with our general pedagogies and also with our technological pedagogies, particularly in science. And that's the point Gregson's making. The evaluation task for the week is the last one. Now, this is the one that I do encourage you to do because it feeds primarily into your assessment task. So you'll find it in the 5th E of the ebook. It's an evaluation task, and in there I also point you to the QCCA page where you can get examples of science units in the classroom and how to use them and approach them. But we've got the Moodle links here. So when you go into the ACS, go into your library, the Primary Connections library, select a unit. Can we just do a quick straw and find out which units people are actually selecting for their Pesha-Kusha? Maybe we can start with Nicole O'Brien. Have you selected a unit yet?
Hi, yeah, I have. I did Year 3 living and non-living things.
Okay, and what was your rationale for choosing that one?
Basically, it just interested me.
Yeah.
Nothing over the top. So it was one that just interested me, and it got me thinking myself. And the topic I've chosen to do is inquiry-based learning.
Fabulous. Okay, that will lend itself really well and nicely to that topic. Good choice. Good choice. Monique, have you chosen one? Monique? Not commenting? Perhaps we throw to Maxine. Maxine?
No. Oh, sorry.
Monique? No, go ahead.
No, I haven't chosen one yet. I'm still, deciding.
Okay, so I throw it to you. Why not start a blog topic and ask what people are doing just in the discussion board? And just find out if anyone's got something particularly interesting that they're looking at that they'd recommend. Throw it out there. Get people talking. You know, it's the only way we can save ourselves a lot of time and effort. This is not a competition. I stress that. You are not in competition against each other. You are in competition against yourself to come up with the best assessment. So have a look. If you've got no idea at this stage, throw it out there and say, I'm thinking of this one, I'm thinking of this one. Is anyone doing it? Any advice from people? You know, if you're doing it, what topic have you chosen? What research topic have you chosen to explore it? You know, go out there and ask. That's what, you know, this course is for. That's what this technology is for, to connect you, not divide you. So, Chris, have you picked one?
I have. I am going to do Weather in My World.
Nice.
Yeah. And I am going to use the narrative technique.
Fabulous. All right, look forward to that one. Good. Great. All right, let's move on. Let's have a look at this. So it's really important, this task actually, to select your unit. And it can be, as we've heard from most students in the course so far, just because it interests them. And when you do, have a look at it. Note the strand which identifies the stub strands, the elaborations, and all of this is apparent in the unit. Now, to answer David's questions before, you know, your unit will be 100 pages long, and you will find the primary connections unit set out so that you can actually consider each of the points of your Pedagogy. So if your topic is engagement, you can look at the first E, obviously, and look what's being done in terms of diagnostic assessment. You can look at the focus of the unit. Is it literacy, numeracy, technology? What capabilities does it address? Does it attack any of the cross-curricular priorities? And that helps you know which ones you're going to include in your Pedagogy. I had a couple of questions on that too in the Q&A this week about the cross-curriculum pedagogies. Do I have to include all three? And the answer is no, you don't. For instance, if you do a unit really below year 5, there'll be nothing of Asia in it. Asia doesn't really pop up till about year 5. And even then, very, very rarely. So depending on your topic and the unit you choose, you'll know from that unit, it'll have it listed for you there, the cross-curriculum priorities addresses, so you'll know which ones to include. Okay, so get to know that unit. That's why we call this week the anatomy of the unit. Get to know it inside out. So, for instance, when we look at this, how do you do this task? Here's one, feather, fur, or leaves. Anyone doing feather, fur, or leaves? Little year 3 unit. Always reminds me of my daughters when they used to watch Play School, and they used to have Don singing feather, fur, or fins. And they used to stand and clap and do all the actions. And so that's why I just picked this one as an example. The bits I've got here are directly from it. You get the unit at a glance, usually around about page 7 or 8. And it takes you through a one-pager about what the unit is all about, and it breaks down each of the lessons. So you get to look at that and you can see, okay, here's the first E, engage. What's got 3... or one lesson basically divided into 2 sessions. And the tasks are laid out for you. And we can see here that diagnostic assessment. So diagnostic assessment always occurs in the engage phase. And for those of you who've been into the Moodle this week and watched the 3 stages of the inquiry lesson videos, you know that the first stage is always diagnostic. It's always the teacher working out what the students know so that they can then address, you know, the misconceptions that those students have. So you can see all of this in the module itself. The second thing, formative assessment usually occurs across the 2, you know, second and third E's. And you can see in this particular unit that's dedicated to sorting out life, animal sorts, and what am I, getting the students basically, you know, you can see the notion there of formative assessment. What am I? You know, the students are now having to identify and apply some classification schemes themselves. Explain, you know, again, formative assessment. Tell us why you think the world is as it is. So here's your misconceptions. Okay, now let's explain your understandings. Now, once they've explained their understandings, we can then move on to the next stages, the elaborate and evaluate, where the students are given the opportunity to change their understandings and align them with what we know as to be accepted scientific knowledge. So you can see, just a hint here, a lot of people focus primarily in their Pedagogy on content. Also look at inquiry skills, and so don't just focus on science understandings, because you'll see when you come into the elaborate and evaluate stage, they're usually doing something. And if you've watched the videos in the Moodle this week, stage 1 is about diagnostic assessment. Stage 2 is essentially about the students working together and testing their ideas and concept building. And stage 3 is actually where the teacher evaluates what they've come out of with that activity, the student activity phase. And the teacher then adds value, interprets, reinterprets, and refines those understandings. So in there, of course, we're talking a lot about science inquiry skills. If students come up with a half elaborated answer, then the teacher may make suggestions about what they've got to go back and redo. So we're talking here as much about skills as we are about knowledge. So elaborate and evaluate. And finally, classifying collections is the final point of that particular unit. So you can see the unit is really laid out for you very, very well in primary connections. So some people, you know, I've had a couple of questions, you know, all we've got is a PDF, you know, how do we get access to the unit materials? You don't really need access to the unit materials. Everything we're talking about here is at the curriculum planning stage. So you're linking your topic to a curriculum plan for a unit, and you're showing how that topic comes to life. So you'll also find in primary connections a section on diagnostic assessment. You'll actually find out what the common misconceptions in that area or that science understanding usually are. And we had Nicole before talking about the fact that she's looking at living things. In her unit, there will be a strong description of some of the misconceptions students usually have. The difference between things that are alive and things that are living. Living is usually associated with movement, and often you will find in young learners up to year 3 and 4, sometimes people think the sun is alive. You know, the sun rises. I mean, let's face it, it does things. Fire burns and jumps and races across the countryside. People think it's alive. Kids think it's alive. Plants, eggs, same misconceptions. And again, a whole unit of study can be built around correcting those simple misconceptions. Fruit is an indicator of life. Carey talks about this in his research papers. However, a plant can be alive without bearing fruit, or flowers for that matter, although flowers, the definition of flower would vary in that case. Non-living things are dead, okay, whereas not all non-living things actually once had a life. Anthropomorphic views. Anthropomorphic is projection of human qualities onto animals. And of course, Disneyland has a lot to answer for here. We all love Disneyland, but at the same time, it does create a great deal of work for science teachers. Do not apply guidelines developed by scientists when determining classifications, and the notion of what is an animal. And, you know, the notion that animals must have legs, animals must breathe, do this and do that. Reality is that science classifications can create a really, really nice unit of study. So at that engage stage, we're finding that most activities are geared around towards this diagnostic. You're taking the core focus of your unit and you're setting up diagnostic learning activities to help refine the understandings of students. Once you've identified what the misconceptions are, you then use your formative assessment through each of the second and third stages of the 5 E's to correct those misconceptions and bring them into line. Then once corrected, you let them go where they can elaborate their new understandings and then test it against real-world structures to either prove or disprove that new understanding, hopefully prove it. So what I'm saying here is these units are quite rich. There should be plenty of information in them for you to conduct this topic. All you then have to work out what you're going to do is concentrate on the hot spots and the hot times in that unit that address your particular topic. Hot spots and hot times. Engagement, for instance, a hot spot, of course, is the first E. The hot times, formative assessment. And of course, the final summative assessment. Any questions or comments at this point in time? Yeah, that's okay.
Colin,
Yes, fire away.
it might be a really simple question. I'm just clarifying. So we go into the curriculum and select a year level and science topic. Sorry, my words are escaping me. And then we go to the list and we select one of the 10 critical questions. Is that right?
Research topics, yes.
Yeah, sorry.
Yep.
And then we focus that research topic on the unit that we have selected.
Yes. Or you can reverse that. You can select your topic first and then go looking for a unit that you think is going to be really, really good vehicle for you to explore that topic. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I had done that and I thought I had done it wrong. Thank you.
No, it's a chicken and egg argument. Some people would start with a topic and say, yep, that's me. I know that one, that's a good one. Other people will look at a unit and say, well, look, I think I'll teach that unit on next prac, or you know, I think I'll adapt some aspects of that unit. So that's the one I'm going to do. Now I just find a topic, an angle, a lens by which I can explore that unit. There's no right or wrong. So the first run assessment tasks. Last week we went through the tasks and had a look, and just to raise the point there made by Noelle, definitely we've got 10 topics. There's 7 more. I've only put 3 of them up there. As you can see, they're written hopefully to be quite interpretive topics. Each of them have action words, limit words, and content words. So the content is, for instance, it may be about engagement. The limit words or the limit words, do I have that topic in front of me here? I should probably use one that I've gotten. Okay, question number 2. There exists a range of different beliefs and theorists, behaviourism, cognitism, humanism, constructivism, used to describe learning in science classrooms. Yes. These theories belong to certain periods in time. Yes, they do. And arguably do not serve the needs of today's learners as well as they once did. Week 2. Yeah, we talked about that with Fidel. From your selected ACS unit of study, identify what role technology could play in enriching student learning. Now we're getting to the real bones of it. Be sure to consider pedagogical approaches as well as assessment strategies. Okay, so the content words, because what role could technology play in enriching student learning? Okay, the limit words, okay, what pedagogical approaches and assessment strategies apply to this in my unit? Okay, so we can look at that question and break it down. There's a lot of information there. And of course, you would include some of that background information, but really the question starts down around here from your selected ACS units of study. Identify what role technology could play in enriching student learning. That's your content. Okay, consider pedagogical approaches and assessment strategies. They're your limit words. Okay, and that's what you focus on. So what pedagogical approaches related to technology enrich student learning? What assessment strategies related to technology enrich student learning? So the questions are, on the surface, long, but essentially, if you break them down, what it's asking you to do is really quite short. And then it gives you the benefit of giving you some background information and some leg-ins. Okay, there's a way of looking at learning, behaviours and cognitive. Okay, all of these go right back, for instance, in the 1950s, cognitivism with Piaget in the 60s, humanism with Maslow in the 70s, constructivism in the 80s. Okay, if you really count Vygotsky, it goes back to the 1920s in Russia. They were way ahead of us. But really in the 80s, and the socio-cognitive constructivism around about the 85s, 2000s, we can see, for instance, that they are dated. And the one thing they neglect, for instance, is technology. That's the one thing they have in common. None of them account for technology. So we have new theories on learning. Okay, so these theories belong to a certain period of time and arguably do not meet today's learners. Fidel. Okay, here's the argument we were having. From your unit of study, what role does technology play in enriching student learning? Okay, so point out what role it plays. Okay, what are the pedagogical approaches associated with it? What are the assessment strategies used? And one of the questions I had in the Q&A this week, do we have to make suggestions on how to improve the unit? No, it's not required. You don't have to improve the unit you're looking at. You only have to explore the pedagogical approaches and the assessment strategies. But if you want to suggest that learning can be further enriched, you're more than welcome to do that, because that actually demonstrates understanding, and that's really what the assessment is all about. Demonstrate your understanding of that particular topic. Any questions about the topics at this stage? Anybody like some clarification on one they've chosen or one they're not sure of tackling? I mean, I do suggest this is good stuff to throw into the Q&A because you get a range of responses in there. But if anyone's got anything on the top of their head at the moment they'd like to ask, feel free.
Colin, it's Sarah.
Sarah, fire away.
Hi. I'm looking at doing biological, year 2 biological sciences, living things grow, change and have offspring similar to themselves.
Great.
Looking at animals such as egg, caterpillar and then to a butterfly.
Yes.
Can that also include like a frog thing, or should it just be the egg, caterpillar, butterfly?
No, and frogs also hatch from eggs. So I mean, it really, you are in charge to include here what you want. The unit recommends that. Certainly, it will recommend you focus on certain things purely because of accessibility. And when you do buy these primary connections unit, they come resourced to tackle certain creatures. However, open inquiry, remember back in week 1 we talked about inquiry having a range of focus. It can be a closed, it can be teacher-driven inquiry, or it can be an open inquiry. If you're doing truly open inquiry, then you may just take students out into your school ground and get them to explore and create a little micro environment and chart all the animals within that environment and then select one of those animals as their animal of study. And so if you're doing that, then you're moving into a much broader version of this primary connections unit than the one that's there. So if you want to extend it to frogs, feel free. Yeah, feel free. However, if you want to just limit it to the current focus, that's fine too. Butterflies, you'll find a lot of resources on the life of butterflies. And you may be able to keep that same topic running through into your second assessment task on digital cards.
Oh, okay. And then I just wanted clarification, because I was looking at, either doing like a frog life cycle or the butterfly one, and then linking that with the research topic number 5, that engagement one, engagement topic. And I just wanted clarification on the diagnostic techniques.
Right. Now, diagnostic techniques usually are listed in the first session of a topic introduction. So when you're looking at your unit plan, go into the engagement stage and have a look at what's happening in their first 1 or 2 sessions. The teacher generally will come in with an activity that gets students engaged in mapping their knowledge around a particular topic or a particular concept. That's where the diagnostic happens. And ultimately, in the evaluation stage, when the summative assessment's due, that's when the teacher actually assesses how much the student's knowledge has shifted from its initial starting point. So diagnostic assessment is also known, for instance, in the UK, New Zealand, and America as baseline assessment. So that kind of helps express a little bit more. So what are the baseline understandings of the students at the beginning of the unit? And you'll find that's usually where the teacher engages those understandings. And that's the meaning of engagement at that stage. Later in the unit, it turns into motivation. The teacher motivates the learners to extend their framework through a range of activities and inquiry events. And so engagement turns into motivation, which is managed through the processes of formative assessment. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Good, good. Any other questions? I do appreciate the fact that people are coming forward with questions. You know, when you're choosing your topic, you know, think carefully about what interests you, and that really is the best way to do it. And I just applaud that, because, you know, really, if you're interested as a teacher, you're going to have that inbuilt passion. It's going to be something that will just shine through. And when you watch your learners coming back to you with ideas and their own understandings, you know, you'll laugh, you'll celebrate, and you'll also really enjoy helping them piece together those concepts. So strip your unit down into relatable bites. That's the goal of week 2. Select your unit, strip it down into relatable bites. You know, get to know the anatomy of it. What's it really about? You know, what are the literacy connections? What are the cross-curriculum connections? Have a close look at them. What are the hot spots? What are the hot times? Okay, where is the summative assessment? What are the levels of performance? And you'll note the levels of performance and achievement are the same across all primary connections units. Okay, it's the same rubric assigned to each unit. Read it carefully. Analyse what, you know, when you look at your topic, analyse what is required in each listed topic and how each topic may lend itself to your chosen unit of study. Asia, I wouldn't worry too much about it, really, if you're doing primary units in terms of a cross-curricular perspective, because it's really not going to appear in very many. Sustainability is strong, and you will see that in the unit description itself. You'll also see Indigenous connections are strong in the unit description. You'll see where that's listed. But make sure there's a match between your research topic and your unit, okay? And that should be apparent just by reading it. Doing well on assessment task is often about choosing the right topic and it being right for you, you being interested in it, and you being able to develop the relevant materials to support your understandings and interpretations. Remember, once you've picked the topic and the unit, you're really then writing your own answer. You're looking at, you know, the power of the research. You're looking at the power of the pedagogy and suggesting why it's a good thing. You're presenting an image that, you know, that stimulates the visual mind to get it hooked into the message, the verbal message, the auditory message that you're giving about why this concept is good, how it supports learning, and what it would look like in this classroom. So choose wisely, because at the end of this week, theoretically, you've got your topic, you've got your unit, and over the next 3 weeks, you're going to be developing and enriching your understandings. You're going to bring them to life. And all we're doing is looking for images, and we're looking at growing the understandings. And hopefully, once we start chatting in the forum, talking to each other a little bit about our interpretations and enriching those interpretations. Last week I put up this diagram purely to help people at this stage visualise what they're doing. The Pedagogy, that represents 6 stages and 20 slides. It's just a suggestion. If you're doing something different, relax. You're probably doing what you need to do. But some people don't know where to start. So this, this will appear in the Zoom session this week, as it did last week. I'll keep playing it for the first 3 or 4 weeks just to allow people some space to say, oh yeah, I'll start there. But ultimately, I've changed it. I've got 3 introductory slides. I've got 2 science connections slides. I've done 6 pedagogical slides. I've looked at 2 classroom applications. You can mix and match depending on your topic. Your topic will determine what you do and how you do it. But this is a suggestion. Try to visualize, try to imagine the Pedagogy. Once you do that, you've then got you've got a fair idea of where you're going to put the weight of your argument and the focus of your images. And once you've got that done, you can storyboard. And I strongly recommend that. If anyone doesn't know what storyboard is, just Google it. And there's a couple of ranges for a couple of interpretations of storyboarding. It comes from the technology design curriculum, but really it's just a case of mapping out what you're going to do. Okay, so have a look at that. That is there for you, and it just goes to show that 5 weeks worth of topics, 1 Pedagogy, 1 unit, and then you're free. Once you've made that decision, you're free to get in there and move the furniture around to suit yourself. The digital cards I won't talk about again today, other than to say it's our second assessment task. And what you're doing in the Pedagogy may very well become useful to you in the digital cards. That's all I'm saying. If it's a subject and a unit that you're passionate about doing, then in the digital cards you get to go deeper as an assessment task. You actually get to produce 2 digital cards that look at one aspect of that particular unit you're looking at. And of course you'll have to do another unit as well because there's 2 digital cards involved. An early childhood or a preschool and a upper primary for those people doing primary education. So any questions before I hit the record button on this one and burn it to YouTube and post it for you?
Hi, Colin.
Yes, far away. Rosalind, is it?
Yeah, sorry. I'm just going to quickly.
Sorry, we'll go with Rosalind first.
I'm just doing Year 4 Earth, Space and Science Beneath Our Feet, and I'm doing the research topic number 9. So can I relate that back to, because research topic number 9 is about how we authenticate it back to the students' community and their own culture. So can I redesign that and take it back to, say, the creek that runs behind our town?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, absolutely, Rosalind. Very much so. Yeah. Any other questions? Was there someone else there? I'll just hold a minute, give people a chance to think. Any questions people might want to ask, or just flick back to the Pedagogy. Anybody want to ask anything about that slide? No? Any comments? Anyone like to suggest something? Or can I, myself, there's something I'd like to ask is, can you please email some things that you'd like me to talk about in these sessions? At the moment, I'm designing the sessions and trying to second guess what it is you might need. The Q&As I am responding to at the time and then sharing with you here. But if you do have something in particular, shoot it through. We'll talk about it. It's not an issue. Okay, I'd really welcome that feedback in that direction from you. If there are no other comments, what I might do is commit this then to processing. I'll do an edit of the video and hopefully get my computer checked out and find out what's gone wrong with it tonight. I do apologise again for the hold up and going, but please, hopefully I'll get round to posting this tonight, all being well. Thank you very much for your attention and for your contributions, and please send in any questions that may emerge from tonight, because if you're thinking about it, guaranteed there are 10 other people. Good night, everyone.
Colin, sorry, it's Monique here. Just before you go,
yes, Monique.
I was just wondering if you could post up, like when you put the recording up, if you could put the PowerPoint that you've used up as well.
Sure, I can do that. Yeah, if people
Please,
prefer
just so
yeah, not
I
a
can
problem
go
at all.
back and, yep,
You certainly can. You can go back and flick through it.
yeah,
Done. Not a problem at all.
that would be great. Thank you.
All right, you're welcome. Good night, everyone.
Good night.